Welcome back, everyone, for our last session of the day. And it's going to be an interesting one, slightly an experiment, because we're going to mix debate and statements. And we have 5 statements prepared. I will get to that in a minute. But this session, as you will also have read in the little booklet, is particularly meant to prepare for INTI's contribution at the next Habitat conference, the Habitat 3 conference in Quito. And there are actually 2 main questions, you might say, underlying this debate, which have also been coming up throughout the day. And one you might call is learning from new towns. What input can we give from the experience of new towns for the new urban agenda, the 10 points explained this morning by Michele? In order to help shape a policy document that could be presented at the UN Habitat Conference, and shape the agenda of the UN Habitat Conference or working session that will be organized by INTI. And another important issue, and it also actually became a stronger point, I think, during the day when so many speakers were saying, thank you for inviting us, not only for being able to give our presentation, but to listen to the presentation of other cities and to meet with colleague planners, legislators, project developers from other cities, from really completely divergent areas, regions in the world, but somehow surprisingly facing very similar problems, or presenting on one part of the world a solution that could be really very well suitable to solve a problem somewhere else. So going further on that, the other question would be, what would your input be for INTI's agenda for the coming years? What should be on it, and also in what way do you want to play a part in this? So whenever you feel like that it would be appropriate, please state that and say, you know, as a consequence maybe to this day or these couple of days, if you've been also on the excursions, I would like to propose the following, and it will be noted. For this working session, I will in a minute be joined by Michele, who will co-host this session with me. And I would like to ask Friedemann to give the first statement. Friedemann Römhild is the team leader of the urban planners of Royal HaskoningDHV. He graduated at the University of Berlin, and he worked with KCAP and Meccano, as working at Royal Haskoning now since 2009. And he will make a statement connected to Sudair, one of Saudi Arabia's large-scale new towns, built in the desert at a 1-hour drive north from Riyadh.
Thanks. The statement I want to make is connected to a lot of the things that we have discussed already today, but you feel how important only when you are working in a context where it is clearly lacking, because of you're working in a context that is dominated by a technocratic and non-inclusive and bureaucratic planning tradition of very enclosed society. Where can I?
Sorry.
Thanks. Well, when I've been working with my team in Saudi Arabia for 3 years on a sequence of new town developments, of which Sudair is the largest. And I think a lot of people have not a very clear idea of Saudi Arabia. It's basically, when we're looking at the 3 pictures on above, it's a very young society, and very optimistic. They like to hang out in cheesy malls and enjoy the social life. As we've seen, 80% urbanization in the map, very much in the beginning. Saudi Arabia is one of the most urbanized nations, but it's also very much developing. So when we're looking at the 3 pictures in the back. It shows the center of Riyadh over the last 60 years. And we see that basically no stone is standing that is older than 1970. So it's very striking. Even the capital, a city of 4 million inhabitants, could be called a complete new town, much newer than Almere, since the traditional I think I stand. Like the traditional urban structure is completely become eroded and replanted. Here we see streets going through existing older neighborhoods. And by now the operation is completely finished. There are something like 10 buildings left over from pre-modern period. So Saudi Arabia is in some sort of a new town frenzy. And I don't know if you have seen the movie with Tom Hanks, Holograph for the King, showing right now. It's about King Abdullah Economic City. But I think it's a bit dated because the script was written 10 years ago, and right now King Abdullah Economic City has developed very well into also an international neighborhood of the economically potent, and it has a sister new town on the other coast, on the other harbor, Jubail, and these two new towns, the one originated in 2005, the one originated in 1975, they account for something like 10% of the economic, of the gross national product of Saudi Arabia. So, because it's full of multinationals, they settled there, and also attractive kind of condo international environments. So the nation is very proud. When we continue, it struck some sort of a new town construction frenzy that kind of got over the top. And now with plans coming into crisis, we are hired by one of the three competing government agencies to basically redevelop all of their plans that are now in crisis mode. So they are supposed to be the third largest new town in Saudi Arabia, near the capital, with maybe the highest ambition. Has been drawn by a Singapore-based consultant as a shiny rendering. And I couldn't agree more than with Markus Appenzeller's statement. We try to evade the shiny renderings, because I think when you're working in a developing country, consultants with shiny renderings, they give the impression that everything is under control. And if you follow the consultant, the city will become reality as planned. Now, nothing could be further than that. When we're looking at Sudea, it's the most important industrial site of Saudi Arabia to the north of the capital. It's the only industrial site, but apart from that, nothing has developed in something like 8 years' time. So what we are doing is also we're trying to create awareness that the shiny rendering blueprint practice doesn't work, and we need to go to a more open and inclusive planning, and we need to go to a different model of innovation than the technocratic innovation. It starts with looking at the site and what's there now. It's basically nothing there except for an industrial site. And the site has been selected because it's flat. There's nothing there. There has never ever been any civilization. That's handy for industrial development at first sight, but it's also an enormous pitfall, since it lacks any evident kind of DNA that you could dwell upon. So what we try to do is look very closely to the environment. It's actually in between a couple of mountains with desert streams, with historic settlements, with actually a regional university that acquired fame. There's a lot in the surrounding that we think that could give a brand to the city. And we challenged as one of the main threats that we want to introduce. We challenge the technocratic water management strategy that is there now. Now, we've heard a lot of how water management can be performed in wet areas with swamp city and green singers and rivers concepts, and that's all very beautiful. But when you have no water at all, you have to resort to something different. So what we have devised is to skip the traditional water method, because in the desert the flooding can be devastating. So people are investing in industrialized water channels to have the one rain per year runoff. So and it's actually it costs money, but it won't help, because in the future, when the city is constructed, there's no need for it anymore. So we're trying to promote upstream water retention basins to create some sort of a DNA, but that's not enough in an area as dry as Suder. So we're enhancing it by creating only one area of the plan where we collect all of the water. So basically, in most of the areas, we try to have underground storage by stony basins. So because a lake wouldn't work, it would evaporate, and then we can pump it to the area where we want it. And so we want to create one concentrated, well, it's not a river, but it could be a desert stream. We flush the water from the reservoirs every once in a while, say every week or every day. So we're trying to create a low-tech DNA, a sense of place that's there in the environment, but we don't have it. And also now we're all very capable of making shiny renderings, but what we're doing is to evade that and create a loose and open framework that we can discuss with everybody involved, because well, in the bureaucratic context, it's all very nice that you're fixing things, and then your other stakeholders disagrees, and then stuff gets delayed, the key investments don't get along. And we have been engaging on a mission for the last year to get everybody around the table around images that we can easily discuss. So basically the main message would be, I think we've heard a lot of these statements in a number of ways before, but you only feel how important it is to have open and inclusive planning when it's absent in a planning culture, and then when it's difficult to promote it. Thank you.
I've moved up here to leave Michelle at that mic. And also because I thought it might be good to walk over to Marcus and also to Preston for a brief, because they actually sort of seem to represent two sides of the scale. So maybe Preston is closest. Where is he?
While you are looking for him, maybe I could ask a small question.
Yes, go ahead.
Because we started with these 10 priorities for the new urban agenda. The first one of it is innovation. This plan and your statement clearly speaks about innovation in two ways. The one is the technical innovation, which is very clear, especially the underground water basin technology. When you look at the social innovation, could you well shortly explain or just point at the incentives which are in this plan that have to do with social inclusion? Because I think that's part also of the previous session on the African cities that we didn't really discuss. Of course, designers are not politicians. They cannot rule the world, change the world maybe a little bit. In a condition like this as Saudi Arabia, where the restraints are quite strong, how do you deal with social inclusion in a plan like this? How do I see that this is an inclusive city?
I think for us it's two ways. It's first of all challenging technocratic planning culture that is based on consultant making a master plan and a contractor building it, and then we wait and see. And what we are saying is, look, you got to approach it in a different way. Before you finish your master plan, and this is still all work in progress, we have started with this project 1 year ago, and we have still a half year to go until we finish the master plan, is that we challenge our client to look broader, to involve all the stakeholders, to talk to the railway company, talk to the airport company, get everybody agreeing on a plan, and have a broad consensus also with backing through all in all stakeholders for it to develop. The second of all, well, a society is a society, and it's and it wants room to develop, but that is not given. Now, the only thing that we as planners can do is can create conditions for society to do the things that are kind of that are within reach. So what we are trying is to create a sustainable DNA to a city that is suitable to the local context and has proven attractiveness to the society that once was inclusive, and then we have to wait and see.
Okay, yeah. That last part of Friedemann's talk was actually what I was going to ask Marcus as well, because I think, and in the tea break, we briefly touched upon, let's say, the level of precision and the level of inclusiveness of also the other plan that DHV Haskoning presented here today, and which you can see also emerging in the plan that Marcus presented, and that has much to do with not going from a tabula rasa but to a tabula scripta, and also involving the actors in place in developing the city. But still you are both very refined and intelligent planners, but you are planners, and you go to the next phase of execution, and then what happens? And maybe you are already exploring that issue, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, there is no guarantee that it will be an all-inclusive city. In a way, that's something which only partially is under control of a planner, if there is any such thing as control. I think that's something, processes which actually largely happen locally, and where local individuals, local groups, local organizations actually need to make sure that these things are actually not happening. But there is no guarantee that it will not end up being a big gated community. I hope it won't, and we're making our utmost to actually avoid that. But these are things which, and comes down to how much can you do as a planner working from outside in a country which is relatively far away. And we very consciously kind of said, well, we're having a very fine grid which has an enormous power, and which also has an enormous redundancy in the system. So it's not hinging on a single road being there for the whole thing to work, but it's actually hinging on hundreds of roads. That's one thing. The other is really, and that's part of the work we've been doing so far, kind of from day one, starting to help people to understand what consequences certain decisions can actually have. In a way, skill building, capacity building, etc., etc. And this is where the plan is at the moment. We're not talking so much about the plan at the moment. We're talking about what's the structure that actually allows the locals to implement the plan. And within that, whatever sort of system where there's a grid or another organizational principle, there's lots and lots of rooms for sort of individual initiative to kind of express itself. I think this plan and the plan in Ningo Pram, they're just on a scale where you're not talking about individual buildings. You're talking about, in a way, the sort of infrastructural concept, which leaves room for pretty much everything to happen.
Before we move on to the next prepared statement, is there anyone in the audience who would like to comment or react on this subject for debate? Because then I think,
I have one comment, and that's got to do with this. But we also saw this in the discussions we had. You know, the agenda that's being discussed with you in Habitat, also these ones here, and this is more so probably a recommendation or a request to include that. They're very much talking on a global, you know, sort of global scale. So kind of treating the whole world as if it is the same. But I think today we saw already in this kind of small format that depending on the stage of development of a place, the challenges and what is necessary and the problems are very, very different ones. So if anything, I think one should actually go much more towards a sort of regional view of the world, and with regional I don't mean like continents, but I mean, you know, let's say stages of development that cities are in.
Yeah, let's note
so
it.
argument for specificity and locality.
Yes.
Yes.
It's
Okay.
priority 9. I completely agree. Underlined.
Let me announce from here our next statement maker. Her name is Elena Bologna. She is from Italy, an architect graduated in Paris, and also has an MA in social innovation from the Danube University in Krems, Austria. She's currently working at SocialFare as a program manager on social innovation projects, and she speaks about the Croata Laguna Eco Park as a prototype of the first social smart city, designed and developed by integrating urban planning, architectural and environmental design, smart technologies, and design of social inclusion service.
That's correct. So I bring you here my experience not that much as an architect because I'm not practicing that much, but as a designer who use human-centered design and design for social impact. And that's why we have been asked by Planet Idea to participate in that project. Planet Idea is the name of the company, a private startup actually, of Italian investor who decided to build this new town. They came with this idea of the first social smart city. So to give you some figures of the project, it's built for 20,000 inhabitants, 20,000. Yes, 20,000, sorry, for 4,000 families, and it's located in the northeast of Brazil, very close to the big town of Fortaleza. Is where a big port will be constructed, harbor, industrial harbor. It will become the third one in size in Brazil. So the city aimed to collect part of the people that will move to work in this area, but also new families that come from low income brackets and that are part of the Brazilian program Minha Casa Mi Vida. That's correct, right. So the idea that of this group is to combine architecture, environment, technology, and social inclusion. And we have been asked to focus on the social inclusion pillar, which I think is the most difficult, even considering that we don't know the people that will live in this city. And it's also a big challenge that came up today in the discussion. So what we did is to think about how a model of inclusion. And we identified 3 main areas of inclusion. For us, there has to be economic inclusion, educational inclusion, and urban inclusion. For economic inclusion, we mean that the space, the new town, has to create opportunities for entrepreneurial activities. Maybe I didn't stress that much on this aspect, but this city is is the first social smart city. That means that all the principle of a smart city will be developed and applied to develop social housing. So houses for that are affordable for a low-income population. That's been said. Technology is the basics of the planning of the city. Infrastructure, efficiency are all fixed point in the design of the city. The question is, how can we, of course, engage the population in this new town? And for that, we come up with this concept of model of inclusion. So I told you about the first one, economic inclusion. The second one is educational inclusion. As social designer, we think that the city has to be schooling pervasive. That means that the space has to be able to teach you things. And by that, I mean not only new behaviors, and you can think about, I don't know if you are familiar with the fun theory, the way you can bring gamification into the urban space. Like, for example, I have to throw away a piece of paper, but I design on the floor the line like a basket campus. And so when I have to throw away something, I actually playing. So I'm induced to do good things, but playing a game. Or educational inclusion also mean creating new space where peer-to-peer learning can be generated. We can invest in the knowledge of people to share with the other. The third model of inclusion is urban inclusion, and for that we work together with the architect to understand how spaces can accept transformation over time, but doesn't have to be big transformation. We have to give to the people spaces that can be easily adapted to their need over time. We were saying this morning that children grows up, so we have to consider that transformation over time, and it doesn't mean to think of heavy infrastructure. It could be small scale solution. If I can come up with if I can summarize the concept that lays behind, is that we're trying to design or to give guidelines of what we call an open source city. So a city that can be generated by the people, the inhabitant, under an ongoing process. And for that, we think that open data and enabling technology are very important, because we can engage people in the decision-making process or in design process, but then most of the time architects leave the city and we don't know if those engagement processes have a second phase. But if we give the inhabitants the tools to perform those engagement by themselves, then we can hope that the city will grow in a more inclusive and socially sustainable way. So this is the challenge that we have been asked to answer, and the city is under construction, but it will be really the effect and the impact of our action we will see that in very few years.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there was a question from the audience in relation to your the microphone. There's another one coming. Yeah.
Thank you very much for this other approach, thinking about people first. My name is Naomi Hoogvorst. I also work for INTI in Kenya and work also a lot on participation in urban development. And I was wondering, you focus mainly on inclusion and in different layers. What are your ideas or your principles for building a city on diversity, and in which kind of skills you can promote that or put that in the plan?
Well, I think that's we came back with the principle number 9 of specificity. Diversity, it's really related to the context, and designing with people means really putting at the center their need and the relation they have with their context. What is difficult coming as an architect is trying not to design that much or bringing this Western view of how we should live, but really listen to the people, because a lot and most of the time people have already the solution in-house. And our role as designer for social impact is really make them able to see this solution and push them forward. So I don't know if I answer your question, but is as I will proceed.
I think that's actually a very clear point you are making, that people very often know the solution, but need some kind of a process to help them see it. And I see Ute Schneider next to you nodding, which is a good thing because she's also the next speaker to make a statement. Just a brief introduction of Ute. She works at KCAP. Oh, can I? Yeah. Mix-up. Yeah. Studied architecture at the Technical University in Constance and in Stuttgart, Karlsruhe and Delft. Partner of KCAP and director of KCAP office in Zurich. And they have recently been working on the areas of Sungang and Qingshui Hei. Oh my goodness. As part of the Luohu district, one of the city centers of Shenzhen. And you've have been asked to regenerate the total 540 hectare site, and you aim, of course, for a strategic framework with a flexible and dynamic development, I think, involving various actors within the area. If I know you a little bit.
Thank you. As far as first of all, hello everybody. And when when I met Michelle and she was asking me to participate, and we were discussing a little bit what kind of topic I would talk about. And when she was asking for new time, I thought, maybe I'm not the right person, but okay. Because I'm more or less working in a European context, but sure, I'm involved in on a kind of a higher level, kind of once in a while in this kind of topics. We will work projects, master planning, or development frameworks we are doing in Russia and China. The first issue, the statement I wanted to make, or the first point that came into my mind when I was talking about that, and I like kind of your notion about social kind of inclusion and social design, kind of what we heard also several times the word sense of a place today. But the question is more or less not to design a sense of a place, but also looking to the sense and soul. I call it very often the soul of a place that is existing. And we saw also several kind of projects. The project, by the way, kind of the images you see here, Markus Appenzeller was involved at that time as well. Kind of how we really address kind of sites like that, depending on what we just heard also in different kind of regions, really looking to the site and also to the lifestyle, to the sense of a place, but also the people that live there, kind of how do they live there, because the whole structure, existing structure which is there, is done by the people that live and work there. So referring to kind of this notion, cities provide for everybody, for all people a place, by change hypos, is because they are designed by people. So there's reason for that. The reason is not only the people, but also topography, cultural consciousness, cultural backgrounds, kind of climate, etc., etc. So I think it's really very important to read this very carefully. And we saw a lot of projects and also bring this together, kind of what is the structure, what is the build structure, what is the landscape structure, bigger landscape structure on a higher level, but also infrastructure, water management, problems kind of that can be kind of solved by planning, but also the people themselves. And that was once in a while missing today, kind of on that level. I think we are quite, it depends. Doesn't matter where we work in, we work for human beings and we have to address this human scale. And there we can connect everything. again. But we have to dive into how they live there, because sure, in China or in Japan or in South America or in Russia, they have different kind of lifestyles, and there's a reason for that. And that was kind of what Christine was mentioning, kind of that they know already, but very often we work in a place, but we work very much with local people, because we don't have this kind of very, very detailed local knowledge. But kind of we can bring from outside, or kind of a mirror in a way with a more objective kind of view, but never kind of try to say them, okay, you have to live like us, because we're coming out of a completely different context. And I think that is really crucial. And therefore we kind of focused also on that project much more on kind of first reading what is there. And if you look to the image, you see already vast infrastructures kind of cutting the site, but also seeing green kind of fringes, they are kind of cut off at the moment. But next slide maybe. Kind of to really dive, to really look to what is there, trying to connect existing structures to reconnect, let's say, what is really original already there. Sure, we have these infrastructures, but we have this big green winch, and kind of we need to work with the status quo on site. Next image. And on top of that, kind of all this this lecture of the existing site, we try to develop not a master plan, but a strategic, flexible development framework. That was one kind of notion Michelle liked to address me, kind of, a master plan has to be flexible. Yes, it has to be flexible, so what can we define? So we try to work within this development frameworks, but steering it by control and laissez-faire. So that means kind of there are certain things we need to fix, so kind of the bigger scale infrastructure, but also the public space in a way. But then you kind of try to define a kind of small grey network, which can also be changed kind of during a long-term period of time when it needs to be planned. Okay? No, it's fine. I can do it without a pointer. What you see on that image is really then kind of looking, and that was mentioned by Linda Flassenrode already, kind of, I was wondering in a way, kind of Shenzhen, kind of the creative gateway, Songgang and Qingshe, Newtown, yeah, not really. But on the other hand, it's only 30 years old in a way. So it's quite new, but there's still there's something there, not only topography and also infrastructure, but also kind of all these urban villages, where we were really looking at that point very carefully, kind of, what is really there and what is really worth to be kept, because otherwise people are not able to adapt but also adopt a new development, because they like not a kind of complete tabula rasa. And if I look back, and this is really on a completely different scale, I studied in Stuttgart and I went then to Rotterdam, and both cities within an inner city context needed 50 years to get back to an urban vibrant life. This goes much faster luckily in China, in these big developments, but it needs a time, and it needs kind of to address all the different kind of elements, landscape structure, build structure, but also lifestyle, use kind of densities that are there on site. Next image. And if we talk about maybe kind of about this notion of density, kind of it's not about density in a programmatic way, density on a kind of social, in a kind of social way, density on a kind of also generation way, because if we kind of, especially in this kind of new town developments, the biggest problem appears if we kind of inhabit this kind of areas with 1 or 2 generations, and then we have this completely kind of best at a certain moment, because kind of we have these changes in our lifestyles as well. So if we have a mix of kind of topology, but also social groups, but also different kind of, like we saw for Winge, in a way, already different kind of typologies within a kind of urban quarter or city neighborhood, we have the possibility to just move concerning our needs that changes during certain kind of periods in our own life. And that needs to be addressed. If you look to this image kind of now here, kind of it's much more kind of also working with the kind of existing but adding then new structures. And that brings me to another topic kind of that was mentioned in this kind of principles. Adopt the green structure but also water management and public space management that has to be integrated into the overall design. So it's so to say, once in a while I even say myself, we don't design, but sure we design, but we design with what is there and then kind of start from that. Next. And that kind of, at the very end, kind of brings us to a kind of certain framework that can have an infill like you see here, but it also can be completely different. So it's not a fixed plan. It can adapt kind of with densities, but also programmatic mix, but there are certain marges wherein a city can develop. And this has to be done with the people on site, and also with somebody, kind of like it was addressed in the early beginning. We are very far away, and what Marcus also said already. So we need to work together with people, kind of local people, but also local steering groups and teams. And it was one of the challenges we addressed early on for this project. If the local community, but also local planning team, or for instance also a kind of expert team, is not adopting what we bring in or not buying into that, this plan goes into the bin. That needs, sure, kind of at a certain point you need to be able to really bring the crowd that is living there and working there and planning there on board. They will kind of fill it in. And sure, if they know the crucial points and the critical points, they will also be able to adapt the plan without kind of completely undermine the overall structure. And I think that's the crucial thing, that we as a planner are only kind of one part of this big game, and we need to collaborate with a lot of different experts, but also the people, they live and work there in the future. Next. It's just an image of kind of how this could look like, but you see kind of completely different densities, but also existing structures that are kind of embedded into the system. And I think that's the point I like to make, kind of never work with a tabula rasa. Even if we work in Newtown, there are natural kind of routes, there are natural kind of sources. There is all the time a structure. What I saw when it's a project kind of Marcus Appenteller was presenting, this the topography, the flooding zones, etc., inform so heavily kind of the structure. That is the sense and the soul existing on the place, and there we have to work with. Thanks a lot.
So I think with that last remark you almost answer maybe my question. If you would have been the planner of Vinge, we were talking about this Viking village that was found in Vinge, and Søren mentioned like what to do with this. We're looking to the future and not so much to the past. While another argumentation could be these kind of incidents that you find working with what's already there are also giving a sense of place, of culture to an area that you're developing. So would you have kept it, or?
I think it really depends, you know. We really very likely worked with kind of things we find on the site. Depends where they are. Are they really in a physical kind of system at the moment, or are they kind of somewhere hidden in the ground? Because then they are not anymore kind of really feeding into this existing system. I'm not the, let's say we really don't believe in the kind of way, kind of all digging this out and make it kind of rebuild something. This is really not what we mean with that. Kind of, it's what you can maybe show traces, kind of to show this layer of history of the, so to say, palimpsest, but not kind of rebuild it in a way. That's really not the topic. If this is kind of appearing, if they start to dig for the building sites, maybe you can take an aspect and integrate it in a public space, but that's about it. I had a discussion about this kind of just 2 days ago. I'm not the one kind of trying to rebuild history. This is really not the issue.
What I got also from your presentation and from Friedemann's and Marcus's earlier, that there is actually never a tabula rasa, that the place, whatever, it has its natural systems, it has maybe its archaeological remains, or informal settlements, as we have also seen in several cases today. There's always an existing DNA in place. I see that Friedemann wants to react to that, but I also have a question which maybe goes back to what we were discussing with Marcus earlier, that the planners can go very far in sort of creating the conditions within the planning process to ensure that maybe the development then will have the level of quality and inclusiveness that is intended. But I also know of KCAP, for example, cases that you remain connected to the development for decades. And I wonder if anybody in the room would wish to comment on that, particularly the people maybe who are actually in either in governing or executing or changing existing new towns at the moment. Maybe first that question and then your reaction. Is there anybody who wants to respond to that, sort of what comes after even the most well-made plan? I think everybody's afraid to tackle it. But maybe Ute, yeah?
I think
And then your response.
if I'm asked what is the, let's say, the final image, I very often say there is no final image. And a lot of people are incredibly disappointed. And that's all the time this kind of gap we have to fill in. On one hand, kind of making this kind of open, which I really don't dislike kind of to call it a master plan, because it's just a kind of this framework where you kind of really fill in something. And this needs to be, there's an incredibly super nice kind of comparison of the plan for Christopher Wren for London and the infill. You really have to look what is really kind of, which kind of parts are the same. But that is the basis where you start from and then you continue. So there is never an end. Everything is in a flow, and we are here in a country where we are kind of very close to this cultural consciousness, kind of that everything is in a flow, which I really realized when I then went from here to Switzerland and also working in other countries. Kind of that informs also how a lot of areas here are planned, like Almere or other Phoenix locations, and we had also at the time, when we were working in China, discussions about, shall we do the same somewhere over there? No, but let's say you have to start, and then you have to deal with, let's say, kind of this changes and developments and keep possibilities open to do so. And maybe one thing I forgot, kind of I noted in my statement, it's also a question kind of how much within this control and laissez-faire kind of approach, kind of what do we design and what do we really not design? And I think we are far at the moment on a level kind of that we design far too much and not keeping things open, kind of creating spaces, refuge spaces that the people on site, people can adopt, can adapt, can really use, can also, they produce a motivation that people build something themselves. And let's say that is the crucial thing in a way, kind of to find this balance in between this top-down and bottom-up kind of approaches. And I think these flexible frameworks kind of allow it, but you have to, and that's a problem, you have to, or let's say instruct people on site to really to follow up the planning process. If you as a planner are not anymore there, because somebody has to have this continuous factor, kind of to be able to really steer it in a way.
You were going to react to that, I think.
Yeah, I would fully agree with Ute. It's about finding balance. And coming back to the remark of should we, when we are trying to find a soul of place, there is no tabula rasa, we want to work upon something. That doesn't also mean in a moralistic way that we need to respect something. I think we should respect everything. Because as a planner, we should make choices. And as Bart also explained, it's good to make choices together with the people, together with the stakeholders, together in an inclusive way. But we should still feel free to make choices if we kind of have a clear...
You should not be afraid to behave like an expert sometimes.
But we also not should be afraid kind of to change things that if people kind of
Exactly.
tell you better.
Okay, we're running out of time, eh?
There's two more.
Yes, and we have two more statements. Let me introduce the fourth, Maren Strijker, urban planner at Arcadis in London, and a specialist on large-scale planning, strategic urban thinking, and developing sustainable and livable cities. And he will talk about Zunyi and Guizhou province, there I go, in China, and especially Zunyi Oasis New Town, located 10 kilometers from Zunyi city and connected with high-speed rail hubs in the near future. And the emphasis in the design is on green space and water, which has also been sort of like a common thread throughout, and one of your principles. So let's hear Maren Strijker on that.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Yeah, a bit around, it is working, right? Yeah, okay. A bit around water management and also design principles and how we can combine the both together, which we do at Arcadis and Callis and RTKL. yeah, we've conquered the world, you could kind of say. If you just look at this map, only the dark spots show where it takes 3 to 5 days to get to. All the rest of it is basically relatively easy to access. If you put that in context, that we have at the moment 7.4 billion people, growing to almost 10 billion people in 2050, that is an incredible challenge. And if you just put density in context, if we all would live as densely as we would in Manhattan, which is not the worst place to live in the world, I would say, the entire human race would be able to fit in New Zealand. So obviously that is not feasible, but it's something to put in context about, and it's at least a good reason for a debate around how do we use our land and do we use it in an efficient way. Yeah, this is maybe not the right platform to say it, but I would almost say no more new towns. And why do I say that? Because if you look at the ghost towns that exist around the world, the abandoned streets and places, the entire plans that are made up, that are actually built, but just no one is using it, or even developers pulled out, so the master plan is not investable. It really makes me question, I think us question, do we do a good job in that? And if you look at some of the fantastic regeneration that is going on in the world, look at King's Cross in London, where an industrial site is densified, brings in new functions, new facilities, harbor fronts being cleaned up, and then new plants are put in place. Highways, roads that existed now become parks. I think one of the messages I really want to give is, like, let's first look also within the city and make sure that all functions before we move into greenfield development. Of course, sometimes there's an incredible pressure from outside. 200,000 people going to the city. That is, well, with refugees at the moment in Europe, there's an incredible pressure in Africa and Asia. We see it in many continents. If we do so, let's just make sure it works. And one way that we apply, and I've seen actually throughout the day, is the layer approach. And within that, take water as a guiding principle. Don't work against nature, but work with nature. Don't try to change it. And consider with that the regional water system. It's great that you find a solution for your specific site, but it has impacts and influences downstream. So putting that in regional context is just essential. There's a very simple way of dealing with it, that is with water basically. First, the water that is on site, make sure you keep it there, so detain it. Then retain it, make sure it infiltrates into the ground, so it adds to the groundwater, which later can be used for drinking water or other facilities. And if it's really the last possible solution should be try to get rid of it. But there again, the regional context is important, because then you're rid of it, but maybe the town next door or your neighbors, they get flooded. To put that in context, we worked in Zunyi in Guizhou province in China, and there we looked from an engineering and design perspective at the water systems, at the ecological corridors, at the nature and the environment that was already there, but also took in culture, the strong culture, the cultural relics that were found on site that we could reuse and use for, well, education, the tourism purposes. So that's the first important layer that you start with. Then you included it within the green network. The green network where you use it as water retention areas for water management, making sure you create safe zones. But that's also very important around education. Education for kids. Why is this corridor there? It's the connection between city and nature that you try to stimulate on a site like this. This was 20 square kilometers for about 200,000 people, so it's a rather massive site. So on such a large site, establish distinctive districts. Don't try to create districts that not are competitors from each other, but really like the polocentric development, as you could see here in the western part of the Netherlands, where each city has kind of a very distinct character, distinct identity, and let's also try to apply that on a more local scale between different communities. Make sure that each of these communities, we created a center with several facilities and, well, actually really strong connections between all those different centers. Those connections, of course, need to be made to the high-speed rail link and especially public transportation by metros and bus, but even more important, so when you design, make sure that, well, we made sure that you have also the walkability and the bicycle lanes connecting each of the different nodes and communities. And create livable communities. How do you do that? Well, in China, you work very often with a regulatory plan. And as a consultant, you try to challenge some of that. You play with the width of the blocks, the urban form, the mixed use, where does the residential come. So that is really an exercise that you do together with the developer and the government and the local design institute to come up with a plan. And very interesting, I think, for this plan, we increased the green coverage of the plan by adjusting this by 7%, which is 7% more green space and water that can be used for either water infiltration or recreational areas. Yeah, so for Sunyu Oasis, what we really tried to do was combining that water management and design principles, put it all together to create an investable plan, master plan for a new living community that is interested for investments, but of course also a great place to live in Zhongyi. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I realize that we promised you a debate interspersed by 5 statements, but we are actually turning it more into 5 statements with a question or 2 in between, because we're running out of time. It's now 10 to 5, and we still have 1 statement left. And in a sense, I think a statement of the next speaker will tie up some of the issues that were mentioned in this forum during the last part of the afternoon. So I would like to introduce Neville Mars. Neville, I'm aware that you have to bring your laptop, but just give me 5 minutes or a couple of minutes to introduce you. Neville is the director of the Dynamic City Foundation and principal of Mars Architects in Shanghai, and a studio with over 13 years of experience in Asia. And he will talk about a recent project when Shell company approached Neville to develop a template for eco-cities in China, and he will explain why he initially thought this would be both impossible and undesired. There you go, Neville.
Wonderful, it's nice to be here. Thank you, Michelle and Christine, for inviting me. Michelle, it's very brave to have me. You've known me for a long time, and I've been a fervent warrior against new cities and new towns for a very long time. And I'm also a warrior against bullet lists with good intentions that kind of try and describe the city in very minimal terms. I've been calling them panda principles, basically principles that you can't be against. Like a panda, you want to hug it, it's beautiful, it's squeaky and soft and fluffy. Reality is more like a tiger challenge, especially Asia. And in Asia, I want to suggest we can really learn from, because that's where the end of new towns really comes to a fore. If there is room for some sort of template, then there must be a universal principle that underwrites all city formations and even planning itself. And that's difficult. We see that if that would be possible, you could indeed, as we're all asked to, we make our money in China, we're asked to bring Western best practices to China and bring the best of Holland. In reality, of course, that comparison doesn't really fly. This becomes even more difficult when we're talking about eco-cities. If indeed there is room for some sort of universal principle, then the eco-city can be reduced to these simple terms, which is clearly not possible when you look at this simple statement. The number of researchers that really study extremely complicated models, how cities grow, and the planners, these two fields are completely disconnected. So there's amazing research, and then there's just us, simple planners and designers. And somehow these two worlds don't overlap. They figured it out, but they don't want to touch reality. We love digging in reality, but we don't want to deal with complicated matrices, etc., etc. So an institute that we've been dealing with, for instance, Marcus' project, my own project with 4 other companies in the Philippines, is for a UN Habitat Lab. They do exactly this. They have brilliant analyses, which are then reduced to 5 principles, density, the grid, land use, etc. So an extreme simplicity that reduces all new towns across the world potentially to this uniform kind of template, which is extremely dangerous. Cities are already extremely uniform, but I'd like to argue that is not really by choice. That is more the fact of technology that is currently in this stage forcing these cities to be the same. For instance, the car kind of imprinting its effect on these urban templates. But technologies will change, hopefully very soon, with electric cars, etc., etc. Teletopia is around the corner. The second major challenge for planners is speed. This is Chongqing and Chengdu, 2 mega cities. Let's go through them in 18 years. There we go. One slide is 1 year of urban development. As I click through them, you see these 2 mega cities kind of grow together. What hopefully becomes clear is this kind of intrinsic, organic kind of inertia. They want to pull together. Dare I say, urban gravity is making them stretch out and reach out to each other. Every single square meter in this image is planned and designed. This is China, centrally planned economy. There's no way around it. And yet, this is the outcome. A blur, or what we've been calling MUD, market-driven, unintentional development. Now, that's nice because China's crazy and weird and far away. But the fact is, that kind of blurred urbanization, as far as I'm concerned, is taking hold of the entire planet. And what's interesting about China is that it's happening within one country at such a large scale. You can actually use China as a lens to address this issue at a global scale. So first was speed, the second one is scale itself. This is Shanghai. Pink is 2000, yellow is 2010. That means that the beautiful polycentric city of Shanghai has doubled its footprint in 10 years' time, which is ridiculous. And that's a recent 10 years. In this kind of rapid kind of environment, you're trying to create green, you're trying to create eco-cities. So one spec, one project has to happen, for instance, in this field between Beijing and Tianjin. The reality is the edge of the city can't even be traced. So the impact of that one city is extremely dubious. There are, of course, many of such sort of eco-ambitions, eco-projects taking hold of, for instance, the north of China. As many know, they mostly have failed. I would argue, as we are planning them far away in the periphery between Beijing and Tianjin, the sprawl, which is a terrible term, but the exurbanization and fragmentation is only accelerating. So, it was mentioned just now, no new cities. I want to push that idea a little bit further. Not only a moratorium on new cities, but also no expansion. We shouldn't expand 1 square meter into the periphery, because we don't know how to. In slow Europe, we know how to. We can model it in computer models very precisely. At the scale of China and very soon Africa, we simply have no means to control that process. So the only universal trait that underrides urban growth is, I would say, G is S over T. Or rather, urban gravity is space scarcity over time scarcity. It sounds complicated, it's not. There's a scarcity for space. We want to live somewhere. But we want it in close proximity to the next person so we can trade, we can negotiate, we can communicate. That's it. That simple proximity driver creates urban gravity. And urban gravity then kind of controls our organic growth. I made it into this silly little kind of diagram which suggests that there is an ideal to these cities. There is a perfect curve we can strive for. But what we do instead, we build these kind of suburban settlements which pulls the curve down. Or even worse, we build satellites far away in the suburbs, which are completely fragmented. Now, in China, many of these projects are extremely dense. That's great. Density is sort of the Valhalla, the holy grail of sustainability, right? So in principle, that perfectly dense suburban node could be the core of your green future. But if you look at the other map, it suggests something is happening that is not sustainable. These cities are not related. However dense your building, if there's not a sort of a coherence to them, it's actually not one contiguous system. It's all based on fragmentation. And all that we've left to do is find a way to ignore and stop building these insular models. This is the Dutch town of Coevorden. Michelle knows it, a Renaissance, but really gorgeous fortified city, where through design and planning, we've been able to, or tried to, temporarily control nature and the enemy. In this case, the enemy is kind of pollution, etc. I want to argue that this model, this insular, very static model, is sort of the metaphor of how we think about eco-cities today. They are still these islands aiming for autarky, for independence, but they're inflexible. In reality, we need to operate in this kind of field. This is the Pearl River Delta, where, for instance, we've been working on the Sino-Dutch eco-city in Pingdi, where, similar to previous projects, we actually had to work on an industrial city that already existed on site. So at least we didn't have to build a new town. And what we proposed was to pool green space from the mountains into this existing industrial area, making it very mixed, and ultimately providing a green corridor through this existing town that is sort of the backbone of your future development. So as we heard before, not planning, but planning a sort of future-proofness, planning slack space in which future technology can be incorporated. Now the beauty is, I was there a week and a half ago, and it really does look kind of like this early rendering. Even then we were trying to kind of avoid these panda principles, as you can see. Finally, Nanchong in 1 minute. For the good listener, I have kind of painted myself in a corner. The truth is, there is expansion. And even China, it's curving out, but even China still has to expand a little bit. Where do we do that? I would propose that when we worked for Shell, to not expand anywhere else than in these sort of industrial sub-centers. So we take the coarse road grid that exists pretty much around every Chinese city, and we start refining it. First with the public grid for public transportation, and then we superimpose that with the secondary grid for walking and biking. All these kind of basic approaches that everybody seems to agree with. That allows us to do one thing. You start in a suburb, and you give the center a little bit of extra time, maybe another 10, 15 years, because currently doing green is too expensive. So you start in the suburb, and then this grid, this eco-grid, eats its way into the city over time. And indeed, it would create this kind of a filter, this symbiotic system where water from the mountains gets out through the city and comes into the river cleaner than it was before. Finally, the project, also another project for the UN Habitat Lab. The problem is, very often, you can't avoid making a new city. In the Philippines, in Tacloban, was ravaged by this hurricane. We were asked to do this new city in the north because it's safe. This is the north, that's the city. All these people had to be relocated because it's safe. That means you almost have no argument not to build a new city. In fact, as we were working on the project, all these NGOs were building their little sort of resettlement enclaves so fast that in the 3 months' time that we worked on it, all this red had emerged. So there was a city kind of becoming, while we were planning the city, not to be on that site. So we were kind of caught up by reality. And we proposed this, and now it becomes semantic, this new approach that says, let's make this new town in the north where we don't want to have it, but at least let's not make it competitive like a proper new town, but fully connected with the existing one through infrastructure. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Neville, for waking us up at the end of this day. because it is all too easy when you have a conference like this with like-minded people who all share a sort of similar practice to reach consensus or agreement too soon. So therefore, I'm really glad that I invited you. And also for sharing the ambiguities of your practice with us, because, as you say, there are numerous developments in here in the projects that you show that are actually sort of new towns. So they are balancing in between doing something that they don't want. And I think your no new towns claim is also very contradictory to the whole idea of being contextual and not saying something that goes for the whole world. It's almost as straight and as extreme as saying we need new towns. I don't believe in the one, I don't believe in the other. So I think the situation in China probably calls for your statement, no more new towns. But then the situation in Africa or even Europe is very, very different. So I think also in the approach that one takes towards the urban policies in a country also needs this contextual approach and to be the right response to the local needs. But nonetheless, I do think that it's very good to say, to warn for the sort of dangers of new towns, especially because I see a lot of new towns that are being planned right now. They are actually escaping the problems and the difficulties that brownfield developments pose. So it's always more difficult, especially think of the African context, and the difficult institutional structures of the African cities to have a brownfield approach, even if that would probably be a whole lot better. So I also think that this wake-up call of no more new towns, it shouldn't also be something like let's not use cars anymore in China or Africa. It's a kind of development phase that also other countries have to define their own position in. And so I think we shouldn't also project our position on those countries. I have the mic, so I have the last word. That's the last word for this debate.